And welcome to Chapter 24, Learning Objective 4. In this particular learning objective, we're going to take a look at the difference between the GDP deflator and the Consumer Price Index. As you saw in the introduction, it really is a matter of how some different goods and services are treated. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. And again, what we're looking at is we're going to take a look at, identify if it will impact and how it will impact the GDP deflator or the Consumer Price Index. So if you want to click on the hyperlink, this will take you to the St. Louis Fed, and it'll take a look at the GDP deflator and the Consumer Price Index. So this shows the Consumer Price Index, and the lighter it is, the less inflation that we have, the darker it is, the greater the inflation. So you can see some of the areas that we saw in 2013 as having greater inflation. The map would look different today. We would have actually more areas in the darker. And we can also say that the cost of living, or the Consumer Price Index, varies greatly based upon the state that you live in. So in this particular scenario, we could take a look at Michigan's right here. And I know some of you are in the Indiana area. Let me see if I can find them. Illinois. I think this showed all 50 states. I'm having trouble finding Indiana. It's here somewhere. I know it is. There's Idaho, Illinois. Maybe it's not all 50 states. But this kind of shows the cost of living index as we look at different areas. And as you can see, California, very high, as is DC, New York. Again, a lot of East Coast. When we look at it here, Hawaii, extremely high. And again, some of that might be attributable to the logistics, and that is the movement of goods and services throughout an economy. So how do we contrast the Consumer Price Index and the GDP deflator? First of all, imported goods. We include them in the Consumer Price Index because anything that the consumer buys, goods or services, is included in the Consumer Price Index. But we subtract them from the GDP deflator through that idea of net exports, right? And remember, net exports is just exports minus imports. Okay. All right. Capital goods. Remember, capital goods were, when we write up the national income identity, we say that GDP is equal to consumption plus investment plus government purchases plus net exports. So the first one here is the net exports portion of this. The investment portion is here under capital goods. It's excluded from the Consumer Price Index. It's actually included in what we call the Producer's Price Index. That would include capital goods, but it's included in the GDP deflator. The last one is the way we calculate it. So remember, in the Consumer Price Index, we fixed the quantity was constant in the base. In the GDP deflator, price is constant in the base. So the actual calculation of the two is a bit different. So let's go ahead and try our hand at these. This is another nice way to take a look at the difference between the two. Again, the math can be a lot more complicated than what we are doing in our course, but I thought this would give you a good kind of representation of comparing and contrasting the two. All right, so now we're ready to try our hand. So in each of the scenario, determine the effects on the CPI and then the effects on the GDP deflator. So just to remember, in the GDP deflator, we want to think about the national income accounts. We want to think about, in the GDP deflator, it's based upon GDP, which is equal to consumption plus investment plus government expenditures plus net exports. And that is, again, the exports minus the imports. Okay, so Starbucks increases the price of Frappuccinos. Let's do the CPI first. Because consumers are purchasing these, what's going to happen is the CPI is going to go up. And because it is consumption under GDP, the GDP will also increase as well. Okay. All right. The next one. Caterpillar raises the price of the industrial tractors it manufactures at its Illinois factory. So Caterpillar is earth moving equipment. That would be an investment. And so what happens is, because it's an investment, the GDP would go up, hence the GDP deflator would go up. But because it is industrial tractors and they're trying to differentiate, it's not for personal use, then CPI would remain unchanged. Armani increases the price of the Italian jeans it sells in the US. Okay, so in this one, we know that it's selling these to consumers, so the CPI would increase. And because, though, it is Armani Italian jeans, that's going to be an import. And because it's an import, then what's going to happen is GDP deflator will actually go down. Okay, let's make sure we're right. Again, they both rise. GDP deflator rises, CPI remains constant. And in the last one, the CPI increases, the GDP deflator remains constant. All right, that's the end of this learning objective, and I'll see you back for the next one. Thanks.